إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. أما بعد, then to continue with Riyadh al-Salihin of Imam al-Nawawi rahimahullah, then we were still on towards the end of the chapter 193, Bab al-Amri bil-Muhafadhati ala salawat al-maktubat wal-Nahy al-Akidi wal-Wa'id al-Shadidi fi tarkihinna. Chapter of the command to observe and guard the obligatory prayers, and the emphatic prohibition and the severe warning against abandoning them. And last time we had two hadith, a hadith of Jabir, hadith 1085, and hadith 1086, a hadith of Buraidah, radiyallahu anhuma. And we mentioned something from the topic, because both of these hadith, as we can see, as is the first hadith of today's, or the first narration of today, they are texts used by those scholars who say that the person who abandons the prayer out of laziness is a kafir, a disbeliever. So we mentioned that we'll discuss something from the issue, and we did so something from with regard to this issue, even though it's a very great issue and books have been written about it. We mentioned something in that regard, that the scholars differed after having mentioned that these scholars, I quote, that these scholars are agreed that a person who abandons the prayer whilst abandoning believing in its obligation, in other words, he denies the prayer, he denies the obligation of the prayer, then he is a kafir, a disbeliever by agreement. However, the disagreement comes with regard to a person who affirms the obligation of the prayer. However, in practice, out of laziness, he neglects and abandons the prayer. We mentioned that the scholars differ in that regard, and we had something from their sayings in that regard. And with regard to the punishment that is to be applied to such a person, whether he is to be executed or not. So the two hadith that we had last week are clear, and what's apparent from the two narrations are clear texts used by those who say the person who abandons the prayer is a kafir, a disbeliever. Likewise, what follows here, narration number 1087, what is apparent from it is that it is a clear evidence for those who say that the one who abandons the prayer out of laziness is a disbeliever. So the first of these last two narrations in the chapter, number 1087, وعن شقيق بن عبد الله التابعي المتفق على جلالته رحمه الله قال كان أصحاب محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يرون شيئا من الأعمال تركه كفر غير الصلاة. رواه الترمذي في كتاب الإيمان بإسناد صحيح. And from Shaqiq ibn Abdullah, the Tabi'i, upon whom there is agreement of his greatness, rahimahullah, he said, the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wasallam had not used to regard any of the actions, leaving it as being kufr, disbelief, besides the prayer. Reported by Tirmidhi in the book of Iman with a sahih, authentic chain of narration. As for who reports this narration, then just as Imam Nawawi rahimahullah said, it's indeed reported by Tirmidhi in Kitab al-Iman of his Sunan, chapter 9, what occurs with regard to abandoning the prayer, hadith number 2622. Also reported by Al-Hakim at the start of his Mustadrak, and he reports it with a connected chain from Abdullah ibn Shaqiq, from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu an, as his saying, as the saying of a companion, Abu Hurairah radiyallahu an, that he said, the companions of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had not used to regard any action, leaving any action as being kufr except for the prayer, or besides the prayer. And reported by Al-Baghawi in Sharh al-Sunnah, and by Muhammad ibn Nasr al-Marwazi in his book Ta'zim Qadr as-Salat, and others besides. And in each of these works, the Tabi'i is mentioned, and that's what is correct, as the verifiers point out. What's correct with regard to his name is that he is Abdullah ibn Shaqiq. This is what occurs in the books of hadith, and that's what occurs in the books of narrators, that his name was the other way around, what occurs here. Abdullah ibn Shaqiq. As for the level of this hadith, then Shaykh al-Albani, he declared it sahih, authentic. And as for the narration that goes back to Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, then in one of his earlier works, Shaykh al-Albani rahimahullah seemed to incline towards its being authentic, but then later on he inclined towards it being having a narrator in the chain who is unknown. There's some problem with the narrator, and that likewise he contradicted one who was greater than him in narrating hadith, Imam at-Tirmidhi, who only reports it as being the statement of the Tabi'i. Wallahu a'lam. As for the narrator here, then very briefly with regard to the narrator, then he was Abdullah ibn Shaqiq al-Uqayli al-Basri, one of the Tabi'in from Basra, who was a reliable narrator from the middle level of the Tabi'in. He died in the year 108. As for the overall meaning of this narration here, and as we have said, this is one of the evidences, one of the main evidences used by those scholars who say that the person who abandons the prayer lazily is a kafir, a disbeliever. And that's what's apparent from the narration. Also, with regard to this narration, the explainer of at-Tirmidhi, in Tuhfatul Ahwadhi, he said, it shows that abandoning the prayer, in their view, I mean in the view of the companions, it shows that abandoning the prayer, in their view, was one of the greatest of sins, and the closest one to kufr, to disbelief. This was said by Al-Qari. This was said by the Shaykh Mullah Ali Al-Qari. Then he himself said, and Mubarak Furi said, in his explanation about Tirmidhi, he said, I say, rather the statement of Abdullah ibn Shaqiq, this one, with what is apparent from it, shows that the companions of Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam used to believe that abandoning the prayer is kufr, is disbelief. And what is apparent from the wording is that this statement was something the companions were agreed upon. So he is one of those who held the view that this is a proof that shows that abandoning the prayer, even out of laziness, is kufr, disbelief. However, those scholars who hold that abandoning the prayer out of laziness is not disbelief, which takes a person out of Islam, it is something major, it is described as kufr, it is major. However, it does not itself take a person automatically outside the fold of Islam. From those who hold that view was, of course, Shaykh al-Albani, rahimahullah, and he said, and he mentioned something with regard to this narration in As-Sahihah, under hadith number 87. And hadith number 87, at the risk of going off slightly at a tangent here, hadith number 87 is the famous hadith of Hudhayfa that we mentioned or indicated last time. Hadith of Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu, that Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, يَدْرُسُ الْإِسْلَامِ كَمَا يَدْرُ, to the end of the narration, that Islam will be wiped away just as the design on a garment becomes wiped away, to such an extent that it will not be known what is the fasting, nor what is the prayer, nor what is the pilgrimage, nor what is charity. And the book of Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, will be taken up in a single night, so that no ayah remains from it upon the earth. And there will remain groups of the people, the old man and the old woman, who will say, we met our forefathers upon this statement, La ilaha illallah, none has a right to be worshipped except Allah. So therefore we say it. Hadith reported by Ibn Majah and Al-Hakim and others. And Shaykh Albani authenticated that narration. When Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu narrated this hadith to the Tabi'i, Sila, then Sila said, when he heard this narration, he said, how will La ilaha illallah benefit them when they do not know what is prayer and what is fasting and what is pilgrimage and what is charity? So then Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu replied to him and said, Ya Sila, O Sila, tunjihim minan nar. O Sila, it will save them from the fire. I mean the statement, La ilaha illallah, it will save them from the fire. He said it 3 times. Shaykh Albani said, commenting upon that hadith, and this is where we come back to where we were here with this narration, Shaykh Albani said in As-Sahihah, and it is well known that the scholars disagreed with regard to the ruling of the one who abandons the prayer, particularly when he believes in its legislation. So the majority hold that he does not become a disbeliever through that. Rather, he becomes a sinner, a fasiq. Whereas Imam Ahmad, in one narration, held that he does become a disbeliever and that he is to be killed as an apostate, not for had, not as prescribed punishment upon a Muslim. Then Shaykh Albani mentions this narration here. He said, and it is authentic from the companions that they had not used to regard anything from the actions, leaving it as being disbelief, except for the prayer, reported by Tirmidhi and Al-Hakim. And I hold that what is correct is the view of the majority. And as for what is reported from the companions, meaning this narration here, then it is not an absolutely clear text to show that what they meant by kufr, disbelief here, was kufr which causes a person to remain forever in the hellfire, and which is such that it is not possible for Allah, it is not possible that Allah will forgive him. Then Shaykh Albani said, how could that be the case? Meaning, how could we take this narration here to mean the companions held a person who abandons a prayer is a kafir outside Islam forever in the hellfire? And that was the view of the companions. Shaykh Albani said, how can that be the case? When this is Hudhayfa, meaning the narration we just had, when this is Hudhayfa ibn al-Yaman, and he was one of the major ones of those companions, he rebutted Sila ibn Zufar when he spoke with speech in the same way as Imam Ahmad and said, how can La ilaha illallah benefit them when they do not know what the prayer is? So Hudhayfa responded to him after turning away from him, O Sila, it will save them from the fire 3 times. So this is a text from Hudhayfa radiallahu anhu, a textual statement that abandoning the prayer, and like it, abandoning the rest of the pillars, in the 4 pillars, the prayer, the zakat, the fasting and the hajj, he is not a kafir. A person who abandons them is not a kafir. Rather, he is a Muslim who will be saved from remaining forever in the fire on the day of resurrection. Likewise, Shaykh Al-Albani said in his checking of At-Targhib wa Tarhib of Al-Mundhiri about this narration of Shaqiq, he said, this and the like of it are taken to apply to the person who is mu'anid, the person who obstinately, deliberately rejects the prayer out of haughtiness, the one who refuses to carry it out, the one who refuses to pray even when he is threatened with being executed, as was stated by Ibn Taymiyyah and Ibn Qayyim, and referred to my treatise, the ruling of the person who abandons the prayer. Likewise, Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah mentions in Majmu' al-Fatawa, as a second quote on the meaning of this narration here, Shaykh al-Islam said in Majmu' al-Fatawa, volume 22, page 48, giving a similar understanding to this narration as Imam Ahmad, as one of the two narrations from Imam Ahmad, that it applies to a person who refuses to pray even when he's threatened with execution. He still refuses to pray. So Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah said, and when a man refuses to pray even until he is executed, then in that case he cannot inwardly be actually affirming in its obligation, nor one who is adhering to its performance. And this person, he is a kafir, a disbeliever, by agreement of the Muslims, as is well reported in the narrations from the companions, that this is kufr. And this is clearly proven in the authentic texts, such as his sallallahu alayhi wa sallam saying, لَيْسَ بَيْنَ الْعَبْدِ وَبَيْنَ الْكُفْرِ إِلَّا, the narration we had last time, there is nothing between a person and abandoning the prayer, rather there is nothing between a person and between kufr except for abandoning the prayer, reported by Muslim. And his saying, the covenant which is between us and them is the prayer. So whoever abandons it, then he has become a kafir, a disbeliever. And the saying of Abdullah ibn Shaqiq, the companions of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam had not used to regard any of the actions, leaving it as being kufr, except for the prayer. So whoever persists upon abandoning it until he dies, he will not perform a single sajda ever for Allah, then he can never be a Muslim agreeing to its obligation. As for the one main point of benefit to be taken from the narration, then that which Al-Baghawi mentioned as a chapter heading for it in Sharh al-Sunnah, which is that it shows the threat upon the person who abandons the prayer. The threat upon the person who abandons the prayer. Al-Baghawi, Imam Al-Baghawi in Sharh al-Sunnah. As for the next and last hadith in the chapter, then this next narration is a narration which is used by those scholars who say the person who abandons the prayer out of laziness does not become a kafir because of that, does not become a disbeliever outside Islam on account of that alone. This one, the evidence is mentioned amongst their evidences by Ibn al-Qayyim in his book on the prayer. So it's hadith number 1088. وعن أبي هريرة رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إن أول ما يحاسب به العبد يوم القيامة من عمله صلاته فإن صلحت فقد أفلح وأنجح وإن فسدت فقد خاب وخسر فإن انتقص من فريضته شيء قال الرب عز وجل انظروا هل لعبدي من تطوع فيكمل منها ما انتقص من الفريضة ثم تكون سائر أعماله على هذا رواه الترمذي وقال حديث حسن. And from Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, who said, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, the first thing for which the servant will be brought to account on the day of resurrection from his deeds will be his prayer. So if it is sound, then he will have prospered and succeeded. And if it is rotten, then he will be ruined and he will have lost. And if there is anything missing from his obligatory prayer, then the Lord, the mighty and majestic, will say, look and see, does my servant have any optional acts, so that what he omitted from the obligatory prayer can be made up with it. Then the rest of his deeds will be dealt with in a similar manner. Reported by Tirmidhi, and he said the hadith is Hasan. As for who reports this narration, then indeed, as Imam Nawawi rahimahullah said, it's indeed reported by At-Tirmidhi in the book of the Times of the Prayers, chapter 193, as hadith number 413. And reported by Abu Dawood, also in the book of prayer, hadith number 864, and by An-Nasa'i in the book of prayer, hadith number 466, and by Ibn Majah in the book of establishment of the prayer, hadith number 1425, and reported by Imam Ahmad, and Al-Bayhaqi, and Al-Baghawi in Sharh al-Sunnah, and Ibn Abi Shayba also. The narration of At-Tirmidhi and likewise the narration of An-Nasa'i, they have an addition at the start with regard to how the hadith came to be narrated by the companion. So they both report from Hurayth ibn Qabisa, who said, I came to Al-Madinah and I said, Allahumma yassir li jalisan salihan. Meaning he made dua. So I came to Medina and I said, meaning I made dua, O Allah, make easy for me a righteous sitting companion. He said, so I came to sit with Abu Hurairah. I ended up sitting with Abu Hurairah. So then I said, I have asked Allah that He should grant me a righteous sitting companion. So therefore narrate to me a hadith which you heard from Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And hopefully Allah will benefit me through it. So therefore he said, Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, he quoted this hadith. He said, Allah's Messenger, he said, I heard Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam say, the first thing which the servant will be questioned about on the day of resurrection from his deeds is the prayer, to the end of the hadith. As for the authenticity of this hadith, then Shaykh al-Albani said, with regard to it, it is sahih, authentic. And he's checking about Tirmidhi, he said it's sahih. And in his notes to Al-Mishkat, Mishkat al-Masabih, Shaykh al-Albani said, Shaykh al-Albani said, its narrators are reliable, and there is disagreement about its chain of narration. However, the hadith itself is sahih through its many witnesses. As for two or three of the phrases in the hadith to explain, then the phrase فَقَدْ خَابَ, that whoever comes on the day of resurrection with his prayer being disordered, being rotten, فَقَدْ خَابَ, then he will be ruined. Then Shaykh Ali al-Qari, he said in his explanation of Mishkat al-Mirqat al-Mafatih, he said, by his being deprived of reward. فَقَدْ خَابَ, he'll be ruined, he said, meaning by his being deprived of reward. وَخَسِرَ, and he will lose, he'll be in loss. Again, Shaykh Ali al-Qari said, he'll be in loss, meaning by punishment coming about for him. Or it is said, the meaning of khaba, the first word, he'll be ruined, is that he will regret. And the meaning of the second one, khasira, meaning he will be deprived of success and of salvation before the punishment. As for the phrase فَيُكَمَّلُ مِنْهَا مَنْ تَقَصَ مِنَ الْفَرِيضَةِ, so that which he omitted from the obligation will be made up with that. Ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, he said in Aridat al-Ahwadi, his explanation of Tirmidhi, Aridat al-Ahwadi, he said, it is possible that what is made up will be that which he omitted from obligatory prayers and their numbers through the virtue of the obligatory prayers. And that's the first possible explanation of the hadith. I mean, there is a person who missed out some of the obligatory prayers. So therefore, his optional prayers that he had can be used to make up for the obligatory prayers he missed altogether. Then he gives a second possible explanation. He said, and it is possible that what is completed will be what he omitted with regard to khushu', meaning he actually prayed the prayers, all of them, But what he missed out on was some of the khushu', some of the humility and attentiveness in those prayers. He said, and the first saying is clearer in my view. I mean, that it's a person who missed out some of the obligatory prayers, so they can be made up by optional ones. He said, the first saying is more apparent in my view because of his saying, and then he quotes a wording of this hadith, ثُمَّ الزَّكَاةُ كَذَلِكَ, and then the zakat will be dealt with likewise, and then the rest of his deeds. And this wording, and it's an important wording of the hadith, is reported by Abu Dawood as hadith 866, and by Ibn Majah as hadith 1426, and it's a narration of Tamim ad-Dari radiyallahu anhu, declared sahih by Shaykh al-Albani, authentic by Shaykh al-Albani. It's the same hadith, but at the end it contains this wording, that after it's mentioned that what he missed out from the obligatory action, the obligatory prayer will be made up from his optional actions, then it is said, then the zakat will be dealt with likewise, and then the rest of his deeds. Now Ibn al-Arabi explains why that's a proof. He said, because with regard to zakat, there is nothing except the obligatory act, or that which is extra and optional. So just as the obligatory zakat which is missed can be made up by the extra acts of zakat, then the same applies to the prayer. What he's saying is that the meaning that the prayer, as we've seen, that some of the scholars explain what it means. It doesn't mean a person who's missed any of the prayers. He's prayed all the prayers. However, within that prayer, maybe he's not been so attentive. He's missed out on some of the khushu'. So therefore, that can be made up by his optional prayers. That's one possible explanation. So Ibn al-Arabi al-Maliki, he is saying no. The correct explanation is it's a person who has missed some of the obligatory prayers themselves, missed a prayer altogether. The reason, or the evidence being, this narration here, that's authentic, which says that the zakat will be dealt with likewise. The zakat there's no khushu', and within the zakat itself, when a person gives his zakat, there's the pillars of zakat, sunnahs within the zakat, how he gives the zakat, the manner of giving. It's either obligatory zakat which he gives, and that's it, or optional. So he said, this hadith is a proof that the prayer is likewise. Wallahu a'lam. In other words, this is an evidence for those scholars who say that the person who abandons the prayer out of laziness does not become a kafir, a disbeliever outside Islam on account of that. Wallahu a'lam. As for the points of benefit to be taken from the hadith, then amongst them are the following 5 points of benefit. And the first 4 of these are all taken from the same source, from Sheikh Mahmud Muhammad as-Subki, modern day or near to this time explainer of Abu Dawood in Al-Manhal Al-Adhab Al-Mawrud Sharh Sunan Abi Dawood. That's one of the scholars of Al-Azhar in the last generation. So he said, firstly, the hadith proves the fact that the hisab, the reckoning, will occur for deeds on the day of resurrection. Secondly, he said, second point, that it proves that the prayer is the greatest of the pillars of the religion after the shahadatain, after the 2 testifications. Thirdly, that it shows a warning against falling short with regard to the obligatory actions. And fourthly, it shows an encouragement upon increasing one's optional acts so that the obligatory duties can be made up with them. And the 5th point of benefit is something which Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah brought in a chapter heading, and that was the grandfather of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah. Al-Majd, his title Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah, who died in the year 652, in his famous book Al-Muntaqa being the main text, which Ash-Shawkani's book Nail al-Awtar is an explanation of. So Al-Majd ibn Taymiyyah said in his book Al-Muntaqa, as a chapter heading for this hadith, he said, The proof for those who do not declare the person who abandons the prayer to be a disbeliever, and who do not state that he will remain forever in the fire, and who hope for him with the hope that they have for the people of major sins. As for the explanation of Shaykh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, then he said, with regard to these last three hadith in the chapter, the hadith of Jabir, and the hadith of Buraidah, and the hadith of Shaqiq, he said, these hadith contain a warning against neglecting the prayer. The hadith of Jabir and the hadith of Buraidah. As for the hadith of Jabir, then the Prophet ﷺ said, between the man and shirk and kufr is abandoning the prayer. And the hadith of Buraidah is the covenant which is between us and them is the prayer. So whoever abandons it, faqad kafar, then he has committed disbelief. He has done disbelief, or he has disbelieved. The Shaykh said, these two hadith show that the person who abandons the prayer is a kafir. Obviously, as we heard, Shaykh Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, was one of those scholars who hold a person who abandons the prayer, even out of laziness, he is a kafir, outside Islam. So he said, these narrations show that the person who abandons the prayer is a kafir, a disbeliever, and that he has committed kufr, disbelief, which takes a person outside the religion. So the person who does not pray is worse than the Jews and Christians. And he explains that. The Jews, if they sacrifice meat, then a person can eat their meat. And a Christian, if he sacrifices meat, a person can eat his sacrifice. But as for the person who abandons the prayer, if he were to sacrifice, then his sacrifice, it is not permissible to eat it. Then he said, the person who abandons the prayer, if, for example, it is a female who does not pray, then it is not permissible for the Muslim to marry her. But if she were a Christian woman, it would be permissible for the Muslim to marry her. And if she were a Jewish woman, it would be permissible for the Muslim man to marry her. Then he said, the person who abandons the prayer cannot be left upon abandonment. He's bringing all these aspects where the person who abandons the prayer is worse than the Jew and worse than the Christian. He said the person who abandons the prayer cannot be left upon abandoning the prayer. Rather, it will be said to him, pray, otherwise you will be executed. Whereas the Jew and the Christian can be left upon his religion on the basis of a peace agreement, or a grant of safety, or a covenant of protection. So this shows that that abandoning the prayer is worse. The person who abandons the prayer is worse than a Jew, is worse than Judaism, and worse than Christianity. This is the matter which people are negligent about today. And it should be known that a person, if he abandons the prayer, and then a marriage is contracted for him to a woman, then the marriage will not be correct. And if he has intercourse with her, then he is having intercourse with her upon the form of fornication. It will be zina, fornication, and Allah's refuge is sought. And likewise, if a marriage contract is made for him whilst he prays, but then he abandons the prayer, then his marriage becomes invalidated. And it becomes obligatory to separate between him and the woman, unless he repents and returns to Islam, in which case he would remain upon his marriage. And it should be known also that the person who abandons the prayer, if he dies upon abandonment of the prayer, then he is not washed, and he is not shrouded, and funeral prayer is not said over him, and he is not buried along with the Muslims. and supplication for mercy is not made for him. And he will not attain the intercession of the Prophet ﷺ on the day of resurrection. But what should we do with him? He said, should we leave him as a corpse for the dogs to eat while we watch? No, we don't do that. That would break the hearts of his relatives. However, we go out to the open desert, to the open country, and we dig a hole for him. It is not a grave, it is a hole. We dig a hole for him, and we put him into the ground and cover him with it. With his clothes on, without any shrouding, without any washing, and without any funeral prayer over him. There is no honor for him. And if it were not for the fact that his family would suffer, we would say yes, leave him upon the earth for the dogs to eat him. And the people watching. However, he is put into the ground to avoid his rotting body, his evil smell and his foulness. And when it is the day of resurrection, the Prophet ﷺ said, إِنَّهُ يُحْشَرُ مَعَ فِرْعَوْنَ وَهَامَانَ وَقَارُونَ وَأُبَيْ بْنِ خَلَفٍ. That on the day of resurrection, he, the person who abandons the prayer, he will be resurrected along with Fir'aun, the Pharaoh, and Haman, and Qarun, and Ubay ibn Khalaf. The heads of disbelief, and Allah's refuge is sought. Ameen. In a footnote here, they mention this narration is reported by Ahmad. And it's reported by others as well. It's a hadith of Abdullah ibn Amr ibn al-As radiyallahu anhuma. And there's disagreement with regard to this hadith, whether it's authentic or not. Wallahu a'lam. Because there's a narrator in its chain, as a side point here, who is Isa ibn Hilal as-Sadafi, who's from the Tabi'een. And nobody who's dependable declares him reliable. Ibn Hibban declares him reliable, but he's lax in declaring people reliable. And there are two or more people who narrate from him, so he's a borderline case. Do we accept his hadith as being Hasan or we don't? Some scholars accept this hadith, some scholars don't accept the hadith as being authentic. It's a borderline case. Wallahu a'lam. As we saw, Shaykh Abu Uthaymeen, he quoted the hadith and used the hadith, that the person who abandons the prayer, and the start of the hadith is, Man hafadha alayha kanat lahu nuran wa burhanan wa najatan yawm al-qiyamah. That Allah's Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam mentioned the prayer one day and said, whoever safeguards it, it will be light for him and a clear proof and salvation on the day of resurrection. And whoever does not safeguard it, it will not be light for him, it will not be a clear proof, and it will not be salvation. And on the day of resurrection, he will be with Qarun and Fir'aun and Haman and Ubay ibn Khalaf. To continue with the explanation of Shaykh Abu Uthaymeen, rahimahullah, he said, and Allah's refuge is sought, he said, he will not be raised along with Abu Bakr and Umar and Uthman and Ali radiyallahu anhum. So through this, it will be known that abandoning the prayer is a tremendous matter, and that it is obligatory upon a person who has a relative who dies upon it. A person who dies, his relative dies, and he does not pray, that he should keep him away from the mosques of the Muslims. It is not permissible for him to put him forward for the Muslims, for them to pray funeral prayer over him, when he knows that he died not praying. Not at all. So if the person does that, I mean if he just sends his body to the mosque so the Muslims pray over him, then he has treated the Muslims wrongfully. And there's no sin upon the Muslims. I mean the Muslims don't know. No sin upon them. Because they do not know. The reason is that Allah said, وَلَا تُصَلِّ عَلَىٰ أَحَدٍ مِّنْهُمْ مَاتَ أَبَدًا وَلَا تَقُمْ عَلَىٰ قَبْرِهِ إِنَّهُمْ كَفَرُوا بِاللَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ وَمَاتُوا وَهُمْ فَاسِقُونَ. Surah At-Tawbah, the 9th Surah, Ayah 84. With the explanation, do not pray over any of them who dies. Do not pray over any of the disbelievers who dies. And do not stand over his grave. They disbelieved in Allah and His Messenger and died whilst they were evildoers. The Shaykh said, so the person who does not pray is a kafir, a disbeliever in Allah and His Messenger. Even if he said, I believe in Allah, I believe that Allah exists and that Muhammad is His Messenger, that is not sufficient, because the hypocrites, the munafiqeen, they say the like of this speech. إِذَا جَاءَكَ الْمُنَافِقُونَ قالوا نشهد إنك لرسول الله والله يعلم إنك لرسوله والله يشهد إن المنافقين لكاذبون. Surah Al-Munafiqun, the first ayah, with the explanation. When the hypocrites come to you, saying, we bear witness that you are indeed the messenger of Allah, and Allah knows that you are His messenger, and Allah bears witness that the hypocrites are liars, the Shaykh said, then you should know that if a relative of yours dies and he does not pray, then it is not permissible for you to inherit anything from him. Mirath, it's not permissible to inherit anything from him, in the saying of the majority of the people of knowledge, because his inheritance is not for his Muslim relatives. Just as is the case if a relative of his was a Muslim, and the relative who was Muslim died, he would not inherit from him. Meaning, if a person had a son who did not pray and he died, and he had a distant cousin who did pray, who would inherit from him? He would be inherited by the cousin, the distant cousin, not the son, by the distant cousin who does pray. His son who does not pray would not inherit from him. And if a person died and left behind his father, and his father doesn't pray, and he had an uncle also, and the child was rich, and he left behind a father who doesn't pray, and he left behind an uncle who is a Muslim who does pray, the wealth of the son would be for who? The wealth would be for the uncle. Because of the saying of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, لا يرث المسلم الكافر ولا الكافر المسلم. The Muslim does not inherit from the disbeliever, and the disbeliever does not inherit from the Muslim. Reported by Al-Bukhari as hadith 6267. The Shaykh said, and this is proven by the texts of the book and the Sunnah and the Ijma' consensus of the companions, as was related from them by Abdullah ibn Shaqiq or Shaqiq ibn Abdullah, who said the companions of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam had not used to hold abandoning anything from the actions as being disbelief except for the prayer. And An-Nawawi said with regard to this man, Abdullah ibn Shaqiq, that there is agreement upon his greatness and his reliability and his trustworthiness and his care. And our scholars, the later scholars, have clearly stated, such as Sheikh Abdul Aziz bin Baz, rahimahullah, have clearly stated that the person who abandons the prayer is a kafir who has left the religion, and that he is an apostate who has gone outside Islam, gone outside the religion of Islam. And unfortunately, the people today are very lax about this tremendous matter. So we ask Allah the Most High to guide us, all of us, to that which contains good and welfare. Ameen. And then the Shaykh finished by explaining the hadith of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, which we'll try and quickly take, inshaAllah. He said, with regard to the hadith, the last hadith of the chapter of Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, and this is the last hadith of the chapter of the virtue of the prayer, the obligatory prayer, and the severe threat upon the one who leaves it, and the emphatic prohibition. It shows that the first thing that the person will be brought to account to from his deeds on the day of resurrection will be the prayer. And this is with regard to the right of Allah, the Mighty and Majestic. So the first thing for which the person will be accountable will be his prayer. If it is correct, he will have succeeded and prospered. Otherwise, the opposite will be the case. He will have failed and lost, and Allah's refuge is sought. As for the rights of the people, then the first thing that will be taken care of will be the affairs of blood, because that is the greatest of the rights. Ad-dima, people's blood, shedding of blood, meaning murder. And then the rest of the accounting will follow. However, Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, will reckon the servant for his prayer. If it is correct, he will have succeeded and prospered. Otherwise, he will have lost. Then Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, will command that his deeds should be looked into. Does he have any optional acts? through which his obligatory acts can be made up. And this is from the favour of Allah and His mercy and His blessings and His fine treatment, that He has legislated for us nawafil, supererogatory acts, extra acts, after the prayers and before the prayers at every time, except for the times when it's prohibited to pray. And that is because there will certainly be deficiency in the person's prayer, which will need to be made up. So these deficiencies can be made up by his nawafil, his optional prayers. So the dhuhr prayer has 4 rak'ahs before it and 2 rak'ahs after it. And the 4 rak'ahs which come before it are prayed with 2 tasleems. And the asr prayer has no regular sunnah before it. However, it has unrestricted prayer. As was said by the Prophet ﷺ, between every 2 adhans there is a prayer. The hadith reported by Al-Bukhari as hadith number 588 and by Muslim. And the Maghrib prayer has a regular prayer after it of 2 rak'ahs. And sunnah, unrestricted sunnah prayer before it. The regular prayer after it is 2 rak'ahs. As for the Isha prayer, then after it there are 2 rak'ahs. And the Fajr prayer, there are 2 rak'ahs before it. And the Salatul Layl, the prayer during the night, the Witr prayer, the Duha, the forenoon prayer, all of these are nawafil, extra supererogatory acts. By means of them, the person who prays, his reward can be increased, and the deficiency which occurs in his obligatory prayers can be made up. So this is from the blessings bestowed by Allah, the Mighty and Majestic. Nas'alullaha an yu'inana wa iyyakum ala dhikrihi wa shukrihi wa husni ibadatihi. Ameen. We ask Allah, the Mighty and Majestic, to aid us and to aid you upon remembering Him and giving thanks to Him and worshipping Him in a fine manner. Ameen. Walhamdulillah wa sallallahu ala Muhammad.